pointed in the wrong direction. Morning, everybody. Hope folks at home can hear me okay. Can someone just chime in and let me know if you can hear me okay at home?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. I'm going to take roll real quickly. Madison Abernathy. Madeline Asbury. If you're at home, let me know if you're here. Audrey Baird. Oops, I'm calling the wrong roll. No wonder I'm not getting responses. This is class 101. I'm sorry, guys. Let's try this again. Natalie Ahrens.
Here. I'm here.
I think Luke is here. Yes.
I'm here.
Is Emily here? Grace Breeden. Paige. Is Paige here?
I'm here.
Ray. Nick Demos.
Yeah, I'm here.
Daniel. Anna's here. I saw her name. Nathan Gifford.
Here.
Nathaniel Gladden.
Here.
Thanks for coming. Morgan Goad.
Up here.
Okay. Kara.
I'm here.
Austin Lewis. Taylor Matthews. Colin McCarty.
Here.
JoJo's here. I saw her name. Dylan is here. I saw his name. Nairobi.
Here.
Alex Rodder. Alec Tharp.
Here.
Alex Thomas. Tanner Voss.
Here.
Sierra Williams.
Here.
Riley Wyatt.
I'm here.
Taylor Trotter. Anybody at home I didn't call your name? Emily, Grace, Ray, Daniel, Austin, Taylor, Alex Rodder. Okay. Thank you for that. I'm glad we've got a strong contingent at home and as well as someone here in the audience today. I did want to thank you guys for Tuesday having Integrity Week during our class. Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And it was germane to our class. It will not be on the test though. I think it's a deviation from the test. So just so you know that. For those of you who might have been wanting to view it later, I did forget to record it. Another reason I'm going to leave it off the test because you can't go back and view it if you didn't zoom in. So I did, before we get started, want to talk briefly about what to do, what's on the Moodle page. Everyone at home, I think you can see the Moodle page, correct? Somebody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So starting tomorrow, our first exam is up on Moodle. And you can find it right here under topic 4, even though we're in week 5. It says exam 1. It opens at midnight tonight, 12:01, and it runs through Saturday and Sunday. At 11:55 Sunday, it closes. So I I would prefer just to open and close it the same day. It would clamp down on the possibility of people maybe cheating type thing. But I know that you're really busy folks, and so some of you may work on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. Hopefully you don't work all 3 days to the point you can't take an exam. So that's why I allow flexibility like this. You will be given 60 minutes to take the test. So once you start it, you must complete it. You can't open it and go, oh, I want to do this tomorrow. So while you can pick Friday, Saturday, Sunday to do the test, once you start it, you have to stop it. And I want to be very careful, because sometimes when you give people clues about the test, they hear what they want to hear. So it is important that you've read the book. To date, counting today, you need to have read the first, 5 chapters? Where are we in chapter 6? Okay, today's chapter 5. That's 97 total pages. So hopefully you've been keeping up. Because just today, looking through chapter 5, there's a test question in that chapter. But if you read the information about magazines and newspapers that are on the Moodle page, that information is vitally important. And probably I would say that the test favors that material over the book. That doesn't mean there won't be anything from the book. But if you look at the study guides, like I've said before, if you know the material on the study guides, you'll be fine with the test. And there's a study guide for each section. So the test will be over, where'd it go? It's over mass media, books, newspapers, and magazines. So I guess I just wanted to see if anybody has any questions about anything regarding the test. Again, it opens tomorrow. If you're ready, you can take it. But if you need a couple more days to study, you can take it Sunday. So, any questions from home? Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the test open book?
Well, in theory, it's not, but of course, anybody could open up their book. What I would say is, if you don't know the material, 60 minutes is not a really long period of time to be looking stuff up. So I prefer that you treat it like a test where you don't look stuff up, but I know that some people will. So, for what that's worth, the test is doable in 60 minutes, but not if you have to look up all the answers. So I don't know if that helps. So it's kind of, obviously I want it to be your own work. And I'd rather you not be looking things up. But I suspect a lot of people will. And I don't mean that to say that I don't mean that y'all are dishonest. I don't mean it that way. But it's a test at home where you have your resources. All I'm saying is if you're reliant upon that, you probably won't finish. So it's kind of, I would prefer you didn't. I'll just say that. Now, one thing, I went back yesterday myself to take the test, because obviously if I wrote the questions, I know the answers, but you want to make sure the test is working. Everything seems to be working fine. I did want to point out that there are some multiple choice questions in Moodle. And so there might be like 5 or 6 terms. I don't know, Gutenberg, media convergence, something like that. And so you'll have the terms, and then the side where it will say select, there's like a sentence describing each term. So next to that word, you have to pick that sentence. And then go to the next one and scroll down. I myself, since Moodle didn't exist when I went to school, I stumbled a little bit on the choices because, it's just like one sentence. I was reading it as like a whole paragraph. So there will be one sentence per term, and you just pick the term that goes next to the word, or the sentence that goes next to the term. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have questions about the test? You guys know this stuff if you've been paying attention. You know, each week you had just 3 little things from the Moodle page to read. They're not very long. But if you've been keeping up, it's a matter of going back and reviewing those things. One thing I did want to tell you is I have not, because of the busyness of the week, been able to grade your news releases or your stories, but I'm going to try really, really hard to have them graded by Monday. If it's a forum or a quiz, I can usually grade in 24 hours, but something that's written just takes more care. And so I try to grade everything that's turned in that's writing within 1 week. So I will try to have that back to you Monday, and that's pretty close to my 1 week rule. Any other questions about that? If not, we'll just launch into chapter 5 here. Okay, I'm going to get out of the Moodle page. Everybody at home see the PowerPoints?
Yeah.
Okay, by the way, who came in?
Oh, Emily.
Hi, Emily. Did you have trouble on the Zoom again? Or
No,
just,
I was walking out the party after my cancer, so I had to turn around.
all right, I'm not calling you out. You're here. I appreciate it. I just want to make sure I count you as present.
Yeah.
This is a semester where showing up matters, whether it's, you know, online or here. So I'm just glad you're here. So, okay. Chapter 5 kind of talks about legacy media. Talks about the 7 kinds of media that are traditional and how they changed over time. The 7 media are newspapers, magazines, books, radio, television, recorded music, and I knew when I started this I'd forget one. Radio, TV, newspapers, magazines, books, recorded music, and I guess the internet media, digital media. And so it kind of talks about a little bit of history of that and then how they've evolved. So, okay, we have 1 hour from now. I'm just double checking because I forgot my watch today. So there are several learning objectives in this particular chapter. They want to talk about the print media revolution, how it first began, although not in too much detail, and then where it is now. And how the Industrial Revolution helped contribute to that. They also talk about how advertising dependency changed newspapers and changed it a great deal. Talks about different publishers at books, companies, the newspaper industry, a little bit of the magazine industry. So basically the big 7 legacy medias, it talks about their beginnings and how they've evolved up until today, but it's in a very condensed chapter. We haven't talked a great deal yet about the music industry, but it's also been one of those traditional legacy medias that have been changed by the internet. And so it talks a lot about that, trade organizations. It also talks a lot about how generational preferences really have made a big difference on legacy media. When we get to near the end of the chapter, they talk about Generation S. My generation, I'm a baby boomer, and then we have Generation X, and on and on. Generation S is a younger generation that were named that because the S stands for screen. They were the generation, you know, have screens everywhere. Their tablets, their iPhones, that kind of stuff. And then we'll talk about alternative revenue streams and that kind of thing. So The book starts off talking about a person who is obsessed with information. And that person is so obsessed with information that they become obsessed with like the Encyclopedia Britannica so that they can take in all the potential information about a topic. That person then over time, as the internet comes along, is like, how can we expand what Encyclopedia Britannica does using the internet? And that is kind of what gave birth to Wikipedia. A wiki is something that allows people to share information and edit it in real time. And so Wikipedia is like an encyclopedia that is edited by anyone who wants to. So Wikipedia now has, you know, millions of entries beyond anything you can get in Encyclopedia Britannica, which is kind of the standard of traditional encyclopedias. So why do your professors not let you use Wikipedia? Why do you think Wikipedia is kind of forbidden? It can be edited by anybody. So it's perceived as, and has been, less accurate as traditional encyclopedias. Now, Wikipedia has attempted to address that by trying to correct bad entries. They even have a committee that looks at things, and they try to make things more and more accurate. And there was a study done not too long ago that that even Encyclopedia Britannica is not perfect, but Wikipedia makes just a few more mistakes. But what was interesting was they were both pretty reliable according to this study. And that Wikipedia was far more reliable than generally thought today. Maybe hasn't always been the truth, but they still make a few more mistakes. And there's always the possibility that tomorrow somebody could go in and mess up a bunch of material at any time. And so Wikipedia gives us a lot of information. Some of it is actually quite accurate, but you're never quite sure. And so it still has a reliability problem, but it's unlimited in terms of the amount of information that we can gain from it. Often if I'm going to research a topic, and I tell my students this in other classes when we're doing projects, I will start with Wikipedia. I'll look up a topic, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I'll read about it, and then I will check the sources in it. And sometimes I will go to those sources and look for them because they're often viewed in more reliable settings. But Wikipedia is still something I wouldn't use for research projects in college, and I wouldn't rely on it. It might be a good starting point though. So some of the legacy industries obviously include the printing press. Going to go back to Gutenberg for just a minute. You know, Gutenberg, when he invented movable type and the printing press, there were a lot of traditional small printing shops that he would kind of recognize today, that they were kind of a cottage industry for printing. But then over time, presses got improved. We got a steam press, and then we got offset printing. And as a result of industrialization and other presses, now printing is big, big business in a way that Gutenberg would not recognize at all. And as a result, there's new media structures and new business trends, and that printing is quite the big industry. As a matter of fact, a slide or two, we're going to talk about Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in America, and how he's buying up newspapers. And so traditional media has revolved and evolved and changed. Just kind of shows some differentiation in printing and how it's evolved. This is in your textbook if you want to look at it. But in terms of books, books are pretty much stitched or glued together. They usually come out as one issue, although if they do really well, they might be first in hardback and then in paperback. And then if they're wildly popular and they're published over periods of time, they might do an updated edition, but generally books are a single issue on a single topic normally. And they're not really necessarily timely, although sometimes they can be. They're just something that's published kind of irregardless of the time, generally speaking. Magazines are usually stapled together. They can be mailed. They come out at least quarterly, sometimes monthly, sometimes weekly. They're on a variety of different topics, and they generally have a timeliness to them. They're about the election, or they're about Black Lives Matter, or they're about whatever's in kind of the news and the ethos of the community. Newspapers are unbound. They come out at least once a week. Some come out daily. They're on a variety of topics, and timeliness is their one advantage over everything else. So newspapers try to print the news of the day. Sometimes they'll have an online edition that comes out so you get the news on the hour, but then when they print it, it's usually the news of yesterday. And so that's some of the kind of traditional print media. And all three of these, I believe, I'm not looking at the moon page, I'm always afraid of misspeaking, are on the exam. I believe those plus the mass media chapter. Any questions so far? This chapter is a little bit of a review of what we've already talked about with some other information thrown in there. So how did the print industry get transformed? We had Gutenberg, that was it. But then when you come to America, there was a tremendous period of transformation during the penny press period. And that was in 1830s. And the book tells you that a man named Benjamin Day had the first penny press. He had the first successful one. They don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but there was actually a medical student who came up with the idea that, you know, Americans would buy anything on the street for a penny. And he actually had the idea, but when he tried to do it, it just didn't succeed. So Benjamin Day said, you know, I'm going to sell my newspaper for a penny. Now they usually cost like 5 or 6 cents. And so he was taking it from 5 or 6 cents to a penny. And the idea was they would sell them on the street to the common man and woman. And prior to that time, they sold them more like for a nickel to more like the elite people. We're going to write what business leaders care about. We're going to write what political leaders care about. But when steam presses came along and the Industrial Revolution comes along, they're able to produce these papers much quicker. And so they could, they were cheaper as well. And so they literally had newsboys that would run on the street and say extra, extra, and they would sell them on the street. Today we have machines that we put them on the street. But the penny press brought the price down and also changed the nature of news from newspapers being for the elite to newspapers being for everybody. And so they wrote about more common news stories. And so the penny press era cheapened the cost of the paper, opened the target of the paper, but one of the reasons that they could succeed at just having a penny was that they increased advertising. Advertising became a big reason that the penny press could succeed. So newspapers in 1830s became dependent upon advertising. They still had subscribers, but without advertising, they didn't exist. And so there were several factors your book talks about in terms of contributing to the Industrial Revolution. Obviously improved technology. Many people moved from rural areas into the city. And so you had people in New York and other places who would buy the paper on the street. There were a lot of people immigrating to America. And so there are several different factors of why the Industrial Revolution made the penny press possible. And it democratized the news. It made news available to more people. And as a result of having more and more things out because of steam press, literacy grew. So in the business model of newspapers, you basically had two things that supported a newspaper: subscribers, people who would subscribe, and then the advertisers. And you need your subscribers because they're the people who read your paper. They were the people who you relied on. You also had street sales. But advertisers wanted to know how many people were reading your paper. So if you could say, you know, I had 1 million readers, advertisers would see that as a better way to reach people. Out of this era, we do have yellow journalism grow because one thing they wanted to do in order to attract the common person was to have more and more sensational news. And so we see a lot of competition during this era as well. So what are some of the business models of different media organizations? This is true in a number of media industries, this model. You have the creative department, and they are the people who do what it sounds like. They're the people who create the content. They write the stories, they do the visuals, they put out the paper. The production department are the people who run the presses and make sure that the paper that's created is actually produced and distributable. The advertising department is usually there's this great firewall between news and advertising because you don't want advertising to influence what the news does. But advertising sells space and takes in money and helps make sure the paper continues. The circulation department is the one that distributes the paper. Someone calls up and says, I want to subscribe to the paper. You take down their address, you make sure they get it. When you subscribe to the paper, if for some reason that day you don't get it, you call the circulation department and they make sure you get one delivered to you. The business department is the one that makes sure economically that the paper can survive. It pays the bills, it keeps the books. It is the one that, you know, the accountants work in and that kind of thing. So the media industries generally have this business model. And so there's lots of different ways to be involved in the media. Any questions about that? Okay. So your book talks about ink on paper industries, because that's what, you know, basically newspapers, magazines, and books are. They're ink on paper. And these industries have had tremendous influence. With them, we've helped advance literacy, we've helped advance culture, we've helped advance the nation. There were early newspapers that encouraged people to move west and civilize the country. There were newspapers that helped us. They advocated we break away from Britain and become our own country. We had newspapers that helped agitate for the Civil War because they wanted to end slavery. And so newspapers have, and magazines and books have had a great deal of influence on society. There's a term that's important called agenda setting. And I think we've talked about this term before, but it's in this chapter again, so I want to make sure that we talk about it. When radio and television hit popular culture, it really shook things up. Like newspapers were influential, magazines were influential, books were influential, but when you added sound, the influence was phenomenal. And so people began to study the effects of media. And people were worried that the media would say something and then that would dictate what people would believe and how they would act, almost as if the American public were a bunch of puppets, you know, being manipulated by the radio and television. Of course, that's absurd. But there were some scholars who came up with some theories about the effects of the media. And one of the things that they said is that the media, because of their function and role, can definitely tell people what to think about. They may not be able to tell you like a puppet, you must believe this, but because of the way they portray the news, they decide what gets portrayed, what doesn't get portrayed. They can tell you what to think about. And so agenda setting is media's power to advance the conversation in the marketplace of ideas, if you will. So there's, you know, if there's 100 possible topics and the media says we're going to focus on these 20, that means 80 are getting left out. That's a tremendous amount of power. And agenda setting gives the media power. Now with the internet and digital media, that power has been a little bit diffused, but it's still there. Hidden implosions was a little section in the book talking about how the traditional media, some of them have begun to really, if not plummet, cause people to predict their demise. The book says in 1984, for instance, newspapers began their decline in circulation. That's absolutely true. And then with the advent and impact of the internet, that just continued to decline. So newspapers have declined quite a bit. And I think I said this before in this class, one of the reasons is classified advertising. Classified advertising was the backbone of most newspapers. And because of the internet and all the different ways you can advertise things, classified advertising is way down from what it used to be. And so revenue is way down. Now circulations began to drop in 1984 for newspapers, but newspapers made cuts. They cut staff, they cut pages. So instead of producing, you know, 20 pages a day, we'll do 15 or whatever. And so they were able to kind of keep their balance of their revenues okay, but that began to change around the time 2008 when we had the housing bubble. So they became, a lot of newspapers closed, some merged, some consolidated, but newspapers have declined. Now, it doesn't mean that they're dead. People have predicted the death of newspapers for a long time. They're still pretty much alive and well, but it's just not the way it used to be. There's not as many of them as there used to be. There's kind of this free fall of newspapers. Warren Buffett, who, depending upon the year you look at the list, has been named the first, second, or third most rich man or person in America. He's a rich guy. He is perceived as one of the geniuses in the free market enterprise. And Warren Buffett, there's a little sidebar in your book that talks about him. He's been buying up newspapers, just gobbling them up. And a lot of people are like, why is one of the smartest investors in America investing in newspapers? Well, he said, newspapers are still how people are connected to their community. It's still the only way you get news about your local high schools, maybe local sports or graduation, or news about obituaries, who's died in your community. It's still the way people are connected. And so he sees real value in newspapers, which I think is really interesting, because I just think Warren Buffett is a smart guy, and he's not investing in these so he can lose money. He's expecting to make money. Magazines are also an ink on paper industry. And magazines entered the American culture after newspapers. They are considered the first national medium because when they were hit the scene, we had finished the what is it, the Continental Railroad, so you could literally publish something and people in New York and California could be reading the same magazine. One of the things that was interesting in the early 1800s when magazines were coming out is that women were an important audience. Long before women had the right to vote, women found connectedness in ladies' magazines. And so some of the early publications were women's magazines. Magazines today have worked very hard to reinvent themselves. There are some magazines that are strictly online. Salon.com is a magazine that is published exclusively online. It's a magazine, but it's a digital one. And so that's one way that magazines have kind of reinvented themselves. Another way is that some magazines are more and more niche for a particular audience. And so they have audience loyalty through, that niche. For instance, there's almost nothing that you could name that doesn't have a magazine. There are general interest magazines, but most of them are targeted. There's magazines for drummers. There's magazines for people who, not only dog lovers, but there's magazines for people who own chihuahuas, and there's magazines for people who build boats in bottles, and little model boats. There's almost no limit to the magazine you can find. And so if you're a person who loves dachshunds, there's a magazine for you. And so the magazine industry in part reinvented itself because it's a very personal targeted medium for certain audiences. Books. We love books. Books have been around since the founding of the country. And we talked a little bit about, how Gutenberg published his Bible. There are books that are considered blockbusters. I usually think of that term in relation to movies, but there have been books that have been so popular that they then have been turned into movies, like the Harry Potter series, the Lord of the Rings, that kind of thing. The book talks a little bit about Harriet Beecher Stowe's book as a possible impetus to the Civil War. She wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin that became very, very popular, widely read, and some people say maybe helped start the Civil War. The book industry has changed quite a bit. There are a lot of trade books out there for different industries. The nature of textbooks has changed. You can get ebooks versus printed books. The impact of books are still there. A really important book and the ideas in it still can transform culture. And because of the digital nature of publishing today, on some levels it's easier to get published. If you write a really good book and you can't find a publisher, there are publishers where you can pay and they will publish it for you. Self-publishing is kind of a big deal. And if people pick up your book and like it, who cares that it was self-published, right? So there's a lot of different industries. Some authors have played with the idea of releasing their book a chapter at a time on the internet, and that kind of thing. I don't know how successful that is, but there have been a lot of different ways to approach books during the digital age. One more thing before we start this. In addition to teaching, part of what I do is I write books, and they're usually related to my research area. And right now I'm writing for a publisher called Lexington Books, which is a subsidiary of Rowman and Littlefield. And what I kind of like about them is it used to be publishers would take a chance on an author's work, and I don't know, they would print thousands of copies or hundreds of copies, depending on the nature of the work. And then sometimes you just have all these books sitting around. Well, Lexington Books publish some, but then as they take it in order, they publish the book. So it's like, if they get an order for 10, then they might roll 20 off the press and just have them. And because of the nature of the industry, they can produce those pretty quickly. So they don't have just warehouses of books sitting around anymore. So the nature of it has changed quite a bit. The sound industry, we all know, has changed a lot. Recorded music. There's been a lot of corporate consolidation. There's been a lot of ways to get music off of line, and there have been court cases about that. Jamie Thomas, there's a index books or a box in the textbook about Jamie Thomas. She's a mom who was sued for illegally downloading music. She said she didn't do it, but it became a lawsuit. And it turned out that once the recorded music industry won, they weren't that interested in taking that money from her so much as they were signaling to people, if you steal our music, we will sue you. And so theft of music, theft of movies, that kind of thing has increased. But also so is, you know, access for things that you can pay for. Not to date me too much, but you know, when I was much younger and liked to buy, you know, somebody's album, you would buy a recording artist's album and they'd have 2 good songs and then the rest of it's kind of like not that great. So then I began to wait till their best hits would come out, because then you'd have all their best songs. But now you can buy, you know, buy them a song at a time if you want to, with iTunes and things like that. Radio as an industry became very popular in the 1920s. And there's kind of a 2-tier system in radio where you have the stations and you have the networks. So you have the local radio stations and then you can have national networks. There's commercial radio and talk radio. Radio has become very, very, talk radio has become very, very popular, because one thing that happened to radio is they came in and they kind of cast a long shadow over newspapers and magazines, because people could hear for the first time the news. But then when television comes along in 1948, 1950, it supplants radio a little bit because you could see and hear. So one of the things radio decided to do was diversify. Matter of fact, a lot of the early TV programs were radio programs. I don't know if any of you guys have seen like Gunsmoke on TV Land, but Gunsmoke was first a radio program. And then when TV comes along, they changed it to a TV program. In fact, they had to change who Marshall Dillon was, because the person who played Marshall Dillon on the radio had a great voice, but he was kind of a short, overweight guy, and he's not what people thought Marshall Dillon should look like. So when television comes along, they get a tall, 6-foot something, you know, good-looking guy to play Marshall Dillon. And so one of the things that radio did to survive TV ripping off their programming, I Love Lucy is another radio program that became a TV program. Radio began to diversify by having talk radio and other kinds of programming that they could survive TV stealing their programming. They had public radio where we have an NPR station on our campus here, where they talk about issues of public concerns of the day. So there's kind of a shifting radio audience. We have on-demand radio. So radio started out as this voice medium that overshadowed print on ink, but then quickly became overshadowed by visuals. And so, but it's still very live today. It's still a lot of radio advertising that you'll hear. Here are some of the music preferences for people 18 to 34. This is a little bit dated. This was a a table they came up with in 2014, so it's 6 years old. But I think you get the general gist of it. You can see how radio attempted to diversify by having certain genres. Radio stations often will either be rock or country, or maybe you have a talk radio station. Popular contemporary hit radio, 12% is the most popular kind. Country music's next, with hot adult contemporary hit radio, rhythmic adult contemporary, urban contemporary, alternate, classic rock, all the way down to news, talk, and information. Even though news, talk, and information's down there, that it's still a popular genre enough that there is a percent of the population that's interested. I suspect news, talk, and information, if you were surveying people 50 and older, it might be a flip. It might be one of the more popular. So that may be driven by age. Movies. One of my favorite mediums is movies. I tell Fred Jones all the time, he's our film professor here. If I could go back and do it all over again, in addition to the things I did, I wish I could have taken some film classes, because I wish I knew better how to write a script, because I just love film. In the early days of the movie industry, studios kind of owned actors the way baseball teams own players. There were major studios that if you were lucky enough to sign on with them, they would help make your career. But they also kind of made decisions about what you could and could not do with that career. And so a few artists got kind of fed up with that, and they created an independent studio. And so some independent studios began to come along. And now in today's system, artists are kind of free to pick the projects they want to. I'm just curious, what's your favorite movie ever? You guys have a favorite movie? Dirty Dancing, okay. I'm not sure if I can pick a favorite. There are several that I like.
Probably Empire Strikes Back.
Okay, I do like the Star Wars genre. I don't know if it's my favorite.
I don't know if it's my favorite, but that's the one that can come to my head. You know.
I got it, because sometimes, yeah. But I do think that the original Star Wars series, and then some of the more recent ones, I've enjoyed some of them too. One of the things that movies have done for society and cultures, they've given us escapism. And that's really important. Even during the Great Depression, when people didn't have a lot of money, movie attendance was down, but not as much as you might think, because people needed the escape. So people still went to the movies. Television kind of threatens the movies, because at some point the value of the movie you can do at home. And so people can be like, oh, I'm too tired to go out. I'll just stay home and eat my TV dinner in front of a movie or something on television. So television comes along. It's been around a little bit longer, but in 1948, it really explodes in American culture, and people across America are buying TV sets. And it changes everything. It changes politics. It changes religion, because they're an outlet for religious organizations. And, you know, it's changed through all these different things where first you had cable, which we kind of talked about when cable came along, satellite delivery, internet delivery, and now program generators. A lot of people don't watch TV when it's on. They'll DVR it, or they'll wait till it comes on Netflix. But movies and TV, movies was the seventh name I couldn't think of when I'm saying the traditional media. I was naming them all. And so television comes along, and it kind of usurps the movies as king. So the movie industry is still very popular today, but what was interesting during the pandemic was there were some movie projects that were being made and they were going to be released, and then nobody could go to the movies. And so, like Tom Hanks had a movie come out during this period, and they decided to release it through an internet provider or through some other channel or medium because people weren't able to go to movie theaters. So movie and television are continuing to kind of meld, and they're almost, a lot of movies are made specifically for TV, that kind of thing. There's different trade groups that lobby on behalf of television and movies. And then there's media laborers and professional ethics. There's a lot of labor unions attached to these two industries. And so they become, you know, gigantic big business. Your book kind of ends with this, not your book, but the chapter ends with this idea of platform neutral future, that the mass media has a platform neutral future. And they refer to that also as platform agnostic, which what that means is the media in the 21st century is not really platform specific, print, electronic, but rather it crosses over and is completely melded and converged. And so platform agnostic, that's what that kind of means. Generation X, again, is that generation that is obsessed with the screen, that they're on their screen all the time. That's where they get all their information. And so the media have to kind of conform to that if they want to reach the audience. So today, I don't know if we're 1,000% platform neutral. That seems a little extreme, but we're more there than we've ever been before. You want to read a newspaper, you can do it on this. You want to read a magazine, you can do it on this. You can watch TV, you can watch films, you can watch movies on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, and on a lot of different devices. So in summary, there's mass media as industries. There are 7: newspapers, magazines, radio, television, movies, recorded music, and I did it again, I lost the 7, but we just went through them all. There are 7 big industries. They're all businesses, and they all follow a particular business model, one of which we outlined. The ink on paper industries and the sound media industries, motion media industries, they've all kind of competed with each other. They've had almost what we would call silos. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this. But today, those silos are coming down and they're becoming much more platform neutral or platform agnostic. That you don't want to be just the ink on paper industry. And that's why most newspapers today have a very strong online presence, and they will have videos and sounds and podcasting. And so you'll see different platforms on all different media outlets. And that's chapter 5 in kind of a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions or concerns or anything? Anybody at home? Any questions or anything?
No.
Okay. I'm gonna close off here in just a second. And I'm gonna come clean the seats. And so don't forget that your test opens tomorrow and remains open till 11:55 Sunday night. And I wish you all well with it. I hope you do well. And I'm going to stop the recording and log out of the meeting, and they'll be up there in just a minute.